close your eyes and try to imagine the most powerful, terrifying army the Earth had ever known. They had already torn through China, smashed across Central Asia, and crushed the armies of Russia and Poland. Every city they reached was turned into smoking ash. Every opposing army was utterly wiped from memory. The Mongols did not just win battles, they ended whole ways of life. And now, in the year 1257, they fixed their gaze on one city, Baghdad. Baghdad was the heart of the Muslim world. For 500 years, it stood as the most sophisticated place on the planet. Thinkers, innovators, and dreamers gathered here. The greatest collection of knowledge rested in its center, the House of Wisdom. This sanctuary hosted scholars from every corner of the globe who spent centuries building on ancient knowledge and passing it to the next generation. Baghdad gave the world algebra and the concept of zero. It possessed surgical tools that Europe would not conceive of for 300 years. Scholars from Persia, Greece, India, and China were pulled to this city because it declared the pursuit of knowledge a sacred mission. They did not just collect scrolls, they used them as foundations for new breakthroughs. Ruling this jewel was the Caliph, al-Mustasim. As the leader of every Muslim on earth and successor to the Prophet's line, his words carried weight across the entire world. Hulagu Khan was marching to claim every last bit of it. Hulagu was the biological descendant of Genghis Khan. He was a brilliant mind. He was utterly brutal. He was completely unstoppable. He had already annihilated the assassins, a notorious, secret fortress network that no one else in history had managed to crack. He wasn't simply a raging warlord. He was entirely methodical, intensely patient. He was terrifying in a cold, almost quiet way. Before he moved against any city, he offered them exactly one chance to submit. Just one. He dispatched his ominous message straight to the Caliph. Al-Mustasim finished reading the letter and reportedly let out a soundless laugh. He assured his circle that if the Mongols assaulted the city of God, every Muslim would rush to its defense. He even promised that angels would descend. Certain of this protection, he never summoned allies or reinforced the city walls. He simply waited. No one arrived. On the 29th of January, 1258, Hulagu's army of tens of thousands appeared with siege engines and catapults. The Mongols breached the dikes to flood the fields behind the Caliph's army, trapping soldiers in mud and rising water. Thousands drowned before the city gates even opened. By February the 5th, the Great Walls had crumbled. On February the 13th, the Mongols marched into Baghdad. What unfolded next wasn't merely a battle. It was a complete and total erasure of existence. For 1 week, the Mongols systematically destroyed everything: hospitals, houses of worship, and centers of learning. Screaming continued for 7 days. Historians estimate between 200,000 and 800,000 people were slaughtered. No one was left to keep an accurate count. And then there were the books. Scholars tried to save what they could, but the Mongols dumped hundreds of thousands of volumes from the House of Wisdom into the Tigris River. Witnesses claimed the water turned black from the sheer volume of dissolving ink. Black water flowed through a city, engulfed in flames. Then, they carried out the murder of the Caliph. Hulagu believed royal blood was sacred and must not be spilled. Rather than using a sword, he had the Caliph rolled inside an ornate rug and commanded his horses to trample him. The very last Caliph of Baghdad took his final, muffled breath, wrapped inside a rug, the terrible, deafening sound of hooves pounding down above him. The Muslim world fell into a stunned silence. For the first time in 5 centuries, there was no caliph or central Islamic authority. Muslim thinkers wrote that this was the conclusion of an age. However, Hulagu pressed on. But Hulagu simply pressed on. Damascus fell quickly as cities surrendered in fear. The Middle East opened before him like an unlocked door. It seemed nothing could stop the Mongols from reaching Egypt and completing their devastation. But stop, because here is the single most important detail that almost no one remembers to mention. While Hulagu was busy reducing Baghdad to cinders, his own flesh and blood, his brother, had already embraced the faith of Islam. His name was Berke Khan, leader of the Golden Horde. Around 1252, Berke met Muslim traders near Bukhara. Their beliefs reached a part of him that conquest had never touched, and he converted quietly. He simply and genuinely became Muslim. When the horrifying news finally reached him that Hulagu had utterly decimated Baghdad, had murdered the revered caliph, and had cast the sacred books of Islam into the river, Berke Khan took an action that was completely unprecedented for any Mongol leader. He declared immediate war against his own immediate family. Berke waged war against Hulagu directly. Their armies collided in the Caucasus Mountains, diverting Hulagu's attention from Egypt and forcing him to fight a war on two fronts. This sapped his strength at a critical moment. In September of 1260, a Mamluk army from Egypt confronted the Mongols at Ain Jalut. These former enslaved soldiers were disciplined and desperate. General Baybars used a brilliant strategy, using a small detachment as bait to lure the Mongols into a massive ambush hidden in the hills. The overconfident Mongols strode directly into the trap. For the first time, a Mongol army was demolished. Their general, Kitbuka, was captured and executed. The unstoppable force had been stopped by an army of men who began their lives as slaves. The faith of Islam had managed to survive, but only just. It clung to existence by the thinnest of threads. It was saved by the bold interference of one Muslim Mongol brother and the sheer, raw desperation of an Egyptian slave army, making its final stand in a valley, with absolutely nowhere left to flee. But here is the twist of history that almost makes your understanding buckle and break. Just 40 years later, the Ilkhanate descendants of Hulagu embraced Islam. In 1295, Mahmud Ghazan made it the official state religion. He rebuilt mosques in the cities his grandfather destroyed and prayed toward Mecca. The grandchildren of the man who ended the caliphate were now reigning as devout kings. The Golden Horde and the Chagatai Khanate followed. 3 out of 4 Mongol empires adopted Islam within a century. The men who came to destroy the faith instead became its guardians. The men who came to conquer and destroy the faith of Islam did not manage to kill it. Instead, they themselves became the very thing they tried to eliminate. There is an incredible, haunting truth hidden deep within this history that the standard books rarely have the courage to acknowledge. Hulagu Khan spent 2 weeks dismantling a brilliant city, killing hundreds of thousands, and executing a spiritual leader. He thought the story had concluded, but he was wrong. But it had not concluded. He destroyed physical matter, like stone and paper, but he could not touch the conviction living within human beings. While Mongol soldiers had bows and swords, the merchants of Bukhara carried an idea that traveled faster than any horse. You can burn books and assassinate leaders, but a living faith in the hearts of people cannot be assaulted by catapults. 1258 was not an ending. It was a turning point that sent history in the opposite direction. The Mongols firmly believed that the year 1258 represented a final, devastating ending. History proves that it was, in reality, a fundamental turning point that sent the story running in the precise opposite direction of their entire strategy. Physical power can certainly grab hold of a city in the brief span of 2 weeks, but the greatest ideas operate on a far, far longer, more patient clock. And when measured by that clock, Baghdad was the ultimate victor. The devastating events of the year 1258 reveal a profound truth, that ideas, sustained by human conviction, ultimately transcend physical power. If this deep dive into historical turning points resonates with your intellectual curiosity, consider becoming a part of this community by subscribing. Your continued support ensures we can keep uncovering and analyzing the essential narratives that shaped our world. Finally, if you know someone who values historical analysis and compelling storytelling, we invite you to share this video. By sharing, you help ensure this narrative's true meaning travels farther than the Mongol horses ever did.